on overnights.
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
We hope. Chief Economist of the MB Fund and MB Super, co-founder of Macro Business, Leith Van Onselen. Good morning, Leith.
G'day, Mike. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I thought this was interesting. It's certainly an attention-getting headline here. Former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry, he was critiquing the Australian tax system, and he said it's intergenerational bastardry. How so?
That's right. Yeah. Look, obviously some pretty strong words there from Dr. Ken Henry. But for those who don't remember Ken Henry, so he's the former Treasury Secretary. He's also the person who chaired the 2010 Henry Tax Review, so the review into Australia's tax system. It was a 1,000-page review done during the Rudd-Gillard years. It was actually very comprehensive, and it had a whole bunch of recommendations on how to reform the tax system, which were virtually all ignored, as is what happens in Australian politics. But Dr. Henry used an address to the per capita think tank last week in Melbourne to basically accuse recent governments of, quote, eroding the tax system and punishing young people, which he described as intergenerational bastardry. Now, what he basically said was, he said that the Australia's tax structure has deteriorated compared to 15 years ago, which is basically when he did his tax review. So, 15 years ago, he thought the tax system was bad and in need of reform. He said it's gotten a lot worse. And he basically said young people now are bearing the brunt of higher tax burdens, lower disposable income and restricted access to necessities like housing. And he also said that this intergenerational imbalance is only going to get worse as the population ages and the reliance on personal income taxes increases. So what he basically, the crux of his argument was that workers today are paying significantly higher taxes as a share of their incomes than they did 15 years ago because the reliance on personal income taxes has grown. So we're paying way more personal income taxes than we did 15 years ago. And at the same time, other taxes have generated less over the last 15 years. And two examples of that, the main one is excise revenue. So we've got fuel excise, which has been shrinking because we've obviously got to pivot to electric vehicles, more fuel-efficient vehicles, etc. That's meant that the federal government's got less revenue there. Tobacco excises have shrunk because the government's charging $2 a dart. People have stopped smoking, or they've gone to illegal tobacco.
Yep.
And also because alcohol's become so expensive, we're getting less alcohol excise because people are drinking less because they can't afford to. So what he basically said is that the share of tax revenue coming from incomes keeps rising, and it was 52% of federal government's total tax take last financial year, and at the same time, GST revenue shrunk compared to 15 years ago. Excise has shrunk compared to 15 years ago, and Treasury's intergenerational report warned that personal income tax revenue is going to increase from 52% of total tax currently to about 58% over the next several decades, unless there's tax reform. And what he said is that this is unfair because we're effectively slugging a diminishing share of workers because we've got an ageing population, the number of workers in the economy as a share of the total is shrinking. But what we're doing is we continually tax that diminishing pool of workers more and more every year because we're so reliant on personal income taxes, which always go up because of bracket creep. So as people's incomes go up, not necessarily more than inflation, their average tax rates go up. And for example, the average tax rate at the end of last financial year was 26%. That was the record high, but it's forecast to go to 28% by mid-2030s. So we're going to keep paying more and more tax. This tax is going to fall on a diminishing share of workers at the same time as the non-workers in the economy pay less tax. And Ken Henry basically said this is very unfair to young people in particular who are struggling to get the housing, etc., who are joined the workforce recently or will join the workforce will end up paying way more taxes than the same people did 30 years ago.
Indeed, and what looked pretty good then really doesn't get you too much in the big city these days. Bracket creep hasn't been arrested. So if we're to broaden the tax base, where to?
Yeah, so basically, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. The Henry tax review was actually pretty comprehensive. It was quite good, and it basically, you could almost polish that off, update it, and re-release it, and copy the recommendations, and we'd be on a much better wicket. But first and foremost, obviously, we need to lower personal income taxes because for all the reasons I've just mentioned. The Henry tax review didn't say this because it was explicitly told to exclude the GST, but I personally think we should lift the GST to 15%. And in concert with doing that, you'd have to give some compensation to people on fixed incomes, etc., like age pensions, lower income earners, etc. You can give them a bit of extra money to make sure they're no worse off. But that would collect more tax revenue and it'd be fairer. But the big one, Mike, in my view, is we've got to raise taxes on resources, especially our energy exports like gas and coal. So, as I've said previously in the show, Australia's in the weird situation whereby we have everything the world needs except for oil. We're the world's biggest coal exporter, second biggest gas exporter, tons of lithium, tons of nickel, everything the world needs basically except for oil. But we don't tax it properly. And at the same time, we deny ourselves those same resources and we drive the cost up. And Australia would be a lot more sensible to actually charge proper royalties and proper taxes on those things that we sell to China, for example, and actually derive some benefit here and drive some benefit for Australians. And the classic counterpoint to Australia of the sort of country we should follow is Norway. So Norway is a big oil and gas exporter, and they took a completely different approach to us. They basically tax the oil and gas at nearly 80%.
Right.
And what that's done is it's actually generated. So what they've done is they tax the oil and gas exports at about 80%. It's generated so much money for Norway that they've created a future fund. It's called the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And what that does is it basically gets the profits from these exports. It then invests it in the fund, which they invest overseas. They don't invest within Norway. And they do that to keep downward pressure on the Norwegian currency, the krona. And that fund has gotten so big now from doing this that it's now worth $310,000 US per Norwegian citizen.
Okay,
So Norway's gotten so rich from taxing its resources properly and then investing it. They're the world's biggest shareholder of Microsoft, for example, and a whole bunch of other companies. That Norwegians, by birthright, are incredibly rich. And even if Norway didn't sell another drop of oil tomorrow or another, tank of gas, they would be rich because they've got the bounty from their sovereign wealth fund. We don't do anything like that. We don't tax our resources properly. We allow foreign-owned multinationals to come in and basically sell it and then charge us high prices. And I think that is the best way to raise tax revenue. But also we need to, obviously, get rid of inefficient and inequitable tax concessions and, things like that. But I think the big one is raise the GST, but more importantly, we've got to tax our resources properly. And if we did that, we wouldn't have to tax workers so hard. We'd have a more broader tax base and we'd actually get some return as Australians.
So why won't the government do that? I mean, are they afraid of the multinationals? Are they afraid of the bigger countries who are the customers? What do you think's the motive there? Yeah,
well, I mean, look. To their credit, the Rudd-Gillard government did try and do the mining super profits tax, which was a sort of watered down version. But if you remember back that far, it got a massive attack in the media. The coalition opposed it, etc., and it ended up getting scrapped. And ever since that time, Australian politicians have been too weak to tax resources properly, unfortunately. And that was a massive mistake. Like the Henry tax review did actually recommend taxing our resources better. It still wasn't as good as what I'd like, or what Norway or Qatar does. So Qatar's another country. Qatar is the third biggest gas exporter. We're the second biggest. They collect so much revenue from their gas exporters for Qataris that they effectively pay almost zero tax. They get free everything and really cheap energy. So their gas exports have made them rich. Norway's oil and gas exports have made Norwegians rich. Our gas exports and coal exports, etc., have not made Australians rich. And that there is a massive own goal. And the other perverse thing about this, Mike, is because we've become so reliant on personal income taxes, we don't tax the other stuff properly, that then has incentivised the federal government to run a high immigration policy because they see it as a way just to raise personal income taxes. For the federal government, personal income taxes is the main game in town. That's how they raise the majority of the tax revenue. So for them, if they import more migrants, they get more personal income taxes. Whereas what they should really do, whereas Norway, because Norwegians are sitting on a sovereign wealth fund worth $310,000 US per citizen, they have a disincentive to run a high immigration program, because if they do that, it waters down their mineral wealth. So if Australia's effectively watering down Australia's mineral wealth through high population growth in a bid to increase personal income taxes, when really we should change the tax system so that we're more reliant on resources, and then we'd be disincentivised to run a high immigration program, because when you do that, you actually water down your resource base per capita.
Very interesting, Leith. Thank you for that.
Cheers, Mike. Speak to you next time.
Leith Van Onselen, Chief Economist of the MB Fund and MB Super, and co-founder of Macro Business.